Hey there, it's Jacob. Today we're going to learn how to bake lighting in Blender so you can optimize your scenes for web usage in Three.js, React 3 Fiber or Babylon.js. In Blender, the scene contains a lot of textures and already has nice lighting applied to it. So why is baking important in the first place? As we have a look in the lower right corner, you will see that it is using a lot of memory and VRAM. So the first reason you want to bake your textures and lighting is to optimize the memory size of your scene. This is crucial for web usage because you want to ensure that the loading times are as fast as possible. Like I said, my scene here is containing a lot of texture files, and usually I use 4K textures. For example, the texture on the floor is using 23.8 megabytes. Because we want to use our model on a website, its final file size shouldn't exceed 10 megabytes. The second reason we want to bake the lighting is to optimize the performance and the look inside the browser. In contrast to ray tracing and cycles, real-time rendering isn't as physically accurate. Here I opened the scene in the Pixeltronics SDK, which is using Three.js. And you can see that all the lights we had in Blender are there. We achieved this by baking the scene lighting from Blender into the texture files. For the tutorial, we are going to use an add-on called Simple Bake. I'm sorry, it's not free, it's 25 bucks. Totally worth it because it simplifies the baking process enormously compared to the Blender baking process. Also, I will use an add-on called UV Pack Master. It's not totally necessary, but it's a really nice helper. Usually, the first step is to decide how to split up your bakes. As you can see, we got multiple objects. For example, we could join the statues and the cubes here and then use a larger baked map for all of them together instead of using a small map for each. In my example, I'm not going to bake the lighting on the paintings because they are going to change later in our website. Also, you don't need to bake any lighting on technical materials like glass. I'm gonna bake the lighting on the floor and on the walls. Also, I want to bake the lighting on all the statues and cubes. For the floor, the first thing we need to do is create another UV map we want to bake our lighting to. This UV map needs to be non-overlapping. So let's go ahead and click a new UV map. And let's call that Simple Bake. And what I can do is just a simple UV unwrap and then use Packmaster to pack the UV. For the floor, the process is very simple. Let's have a look at another example. On the walls, we currently have a very large overlapping UV map. Let's go ahead and create a new UV map called Simple Bake. And let's use Smart UV Project. And also let's pack our UVs. Depending on your model, you will need a different UV unwrapping process, but there are plenty of tutorials on UV unwrapping. The important thing is that in the end you have an UV map that is non-overlapping. Next, I'm going to use the Simple Bake add-on to bake our lighting to the floor. So let's select Cycles Bake and add our floor to the bake objects. For the bake, you want to select Combined. And you want to also enable denoise. I use denoise cycles. The next important thing is to choose the resolution you want to bake with. What I will do is use 4K baking and output at, let's say 2K. This way, baking will take longer, but you also increase the quality of your bakes. Also, I'm going to check Export Bakes and choose my file path. For the format, we are going to use JPEG. Later, we are going to compress our images further. Now, for the UV settings, You want to check prefer existing UV maps called Simple Bake. This is why we have been naming our UV map. We created Simple Bake, so Simple Bake knows what UV map to use. In the other settings panel, we could also check copy objects and apply bakes and hide source objects after bake. We can check the principled BSDF as a material. And for the device, depending on your machine, you can check GPU compute. So let's say we bake in the foreground, and then we can press bake. This will take a couple of minutes. Great, now our bake finished. And Simple Bake created a new object called floor baked. Here you can see our baked texture map. What we also need to do is, in the shader editor, connect the image texture to the emission. Let's see how it looks like. Ideally, you shouldn't notice a big difference to the original texture map. What we can do now is to further compress our texture map. For compression, I'm using Squoosh. You can download it for free. Now we can find a good balance between image quality and file size. So it reduced the file size by 65%. And in Blender, let's connect the compressed image instead of the original one. Now you want to repeat the process for all the objects inside your scene, and then you can also delete the original objects and clean up your file. I finished baking all the textures for my model now, and finally I end up with 4.9 megabytes. So that's actually a great result for a model that contains so many textures. And yeah, this is how the model looks like in the browser. As you can see, all the lighting from Blender is baked into the model. So also performance is great. Please let me know what you think and hit subscribe.